Wagwan. Recently, a viewer of the nickname ChrisChristine-I7Y wrote a comment on my video where I explained all the betrayals in GTA 3. In that comment, they shared an absolutely brilliant theory in my opinion, as well as straight away provided a very solid argumentation. The theory goes that Asuka and Maria might have lied to Claude about Salvatore's betrayal, so Asuka can steal his hitman and so Maria can escape from the toxic relationship with him. Since there's definitely a lot more to say about this theory and explain it in a more pleasant format such as a video, and since the author of this theory allowed me to use his theory as the video subject, well, here it is. Today we'll take a closer look at this theory, go through all the pros and cons of it that I could come up with apart from the arguments provided already by ChrisChristine and Leon Ryu, who also expressed their opinion on the matter. We'll talk about other questions and aspects revolving around this thread, and finally, what's the most important, I'll give you my final verdict, whether I think this theory is correct or rather unlikely. And so let me first of all repeat in a bit more detailed and cohesive way what this theory is even about. So of course, in the game, at some point, we was told that Claude has been betrayed by Salvatore Leone and Claude would have been killed by him if not for Maria, who in the last moment warned Claude about a trap, and then they both escaped with the help of Asuka Kasen, whom Maria described as her old friend, to Staunton Island. Claude soon killed Salvatore and both him and Maria were free. Now the theory, which is the subject of today's video, offers a quite different interpretation of these events, namely that Salvatore didn't betray Claude at all, that it was a lie made up by Maria and Asuka in order to turn Claude against Salvatore. Why would they do that? Well, they both had very good reasons. With Maria, well, she was desperate to escape the toxic relationship with Salvatore. That is crystal clear, there's no doubt about it. It is said in her description in the design document, we see it in LCS in the mission Contraband, she says it herself in Last Request.
Look, you're a marked man on the Mafia turf and I've got to get out of here too. I've seen too much killing, too much blood.
And she talks about it on the radio show.
You see, okay, I had this boyfriend, and at first, he was real kind to me. He was a real gentleman, a little bit older and everything, but he treated me really good. And then it all went wrong, and so, I found someone else, and...
Therefore, Maria was looking for any opportunity to get away from Salvatore as quick as could be. In fact, in the initial story sketch in the design document, Maria in fact at some point indeed ran away from Sal. Additionally, we know that Maria loved Claude and she undoubtedly dreamt of starting a fully fledged romantic relationship with him. With her being his boss's wife, it was just impossible to reconcile, which gave her only yet another reason to try to get away. But not only to get away, but to also get away with Claude, because Claude himself wouldn't have wanted to start an affair with his boss's wife while still being his errand boy. That just couldn't run. So Maria not only had to get away, but do so alongside Claude. So she first obviously would have had to turn him against Sally. Now what about Asuka? Well, she had her reasons as well. First of all, she was at the end of the day a leader of an organization conflicted with the organization of Salvatore Leone. There's no doubt about that neither. Tony Cipriani, a capo of the Leone Mafia 3 years earlier, caused the Yakuza quite a solid portion of trouble and killed their Wakagashira in the shape of Kazuki Kasen. I'm also pretty sure there was some clashes between them in GTA Advance. And well, the sole fact that the first thing that Asuka asked the Claude after she'd recruited him was to kill their Don. So yeah, she didn't like him too much. But not only could she want to weaken her foe, but she would also gain probably the most skilled hitman in town at the moment in Claude. So really, the motivation either from Asuka and Maria was very much there, and it's impossible to deny. Okay, so let's talk about all the things that make this theory believable, and there is actually quite a lot of them. Of course, the first of them is what I already described, so the strong motives of Asuka and Maria and the fact that such a version of events would highly benefit both of those characters. Another thing though is the peculiar deal with the cartel. See, Maria, whilst explaining the situation to Claude, mentioned that Salvatore wanted to give him up to the cartel in exchange for them resigning from the war with them. So simply just to make peace, cause they were currently at war and wars are not very cool.
Listen, Salvatore thinks that we're going behind his back, so he was offering you to the cartel in order to make a deal.
And now technically it makes sense, but the execution of this has a little inconsistency there, and also there's later one moment which puts into question whether that deal happened whatsoever. But to start with the first thing, there's one fact about the execution of Claude which doesn't quite make sense, and it was noticed by the viewer of the nickname Leon Ryu. Now they pointed out that if Salvatore was meant to give Claude up to the cartel, how was cartel to know that Sal fulfilled his promise if Claude would have got blown up inside of a car? I mean, his skin could get charred, I believe, his whole face could be missing. Sal could have just as well sent a random goon there and it would look similar probably. If the deal was really that, the Colombians would have definitely wanted Claude alive, or at least for him to be assassinated at the eyes of their people who could have verified that the guy killed was indeed Claude. But none of that happened, which either means that the Colombians are absolute idiots, or that perhaps that deal was just a lie fed to Claude by Maria in order to explain Salvatore's alleged betrayal, which was supposed to turn Claude against him. The second thing is their uncertainty over when Catalina found out that she failed to kill Claude at the beginning. At first glance, her reaction upon seeing Claude in Grand Theft Auto tells us that it was precisely in that moment that she realized that Claude was still alive.
Hey, take it easy, amigo. No es nada, no es nada.
I left you pouring your heart out into the gutter.
And also, only right after that mission, she actually launched a mission to track him down, which makes sense if we assume that she had only found out.
Still, he's revealed the extent to which Catalina fears your quest for revenge. She has 3 death squads dotted around Liberty, whose sole job is to hunt you down.
However, there's 3 things that make it quite doubtful. First of all, there's a mission called Kingdom Come for King Courtney, which is unlocked before the mission Grand Theft Auto, and in which King Courtney set Claude up under orders or as a matter of a deal with none other than Catalina, whose letter to Claude we can even read in this mission if we got the subtitles on. That tells us that Catalina must have known that Claude was alive, since otherwise how could she set a trap up for him, and what would be a point of writing a letter to a dead man? And actually, since the Yardies, so the gang of which King Courtney was leader of, were collaborating with the cartel throughout the story, Courtney may have reported to Catalina that Claude is well and alive. But that of course is not such a strong argument, since he may have either wanted to first exploit him to the limit, or perhaps he didn't even know that Catalina wanted Claude dead. But since this line of missions is not only fully optional, but also it can be completed at any point after unlocking, including after the mission Grand Theft Auto and before the exchange, where it would make sense to complete it because in that period Catalina knew about Claude being alive and wasn't dead yet. This whole argument can be tackled by saying that the developers maybe accidentally gave us a little bit too much freedom with that thread, and that canon wise it is completed in that period I mentioned. And fair enough, but that's not all.
You are new in Liberty, but already you are gaining a reputation on the streets.
This dialogue leads us to another thing, which is that Claude held a reputation in the city. I mean, El Burro found out about him, then Courtney, then Diaz, and assuming that the theory of today's subject is correct, even Asuka found out about Claude's existence and his extraordinary gangbanging abilities. And so you trying to tell me that all those people were well aware of Claude and were reaching out to him offering work, but the gang, which was arguably most affected by Claude's work for the Mafia and one of whose main faces, so Catalina, was probably the person who would have been the most interested in the news that Claude was alive, aka the cartel, didn't notice Claude's existence? And more precisely, didn't Catalina notice it? I mean, come on, that again would make the cartel the biggest idiots in the universe, and blind at that. Besides, Claude was in the newspaper as well. His tragic love story became a subject of interest among many casual Liberty City citizens. Not only that, but from the intro news report, we also found out that the cartel wiped out the data of the prisoners being transported in the convoy from the LCPD database.
Revelations as to the professionalism of the attack struck police hours afterward, when identification of the missing felons were further hampered by an attack by computer hackers on police headquarters databases.
And they still didn't notice that they were in fact erasing the data of Claude? This is wild. And of course, the last argument that proves that Catalina must have known about Claude, which if we assume today's theory is correct, doesn't do that, is the aforementioned deal between the Leone Mafia and the Cartelino that Maria was talking about. You know, if the cartel literally were offered by Salvatore that he'll give Claude up to them, then how on earth could Catalina still not know about him being alive by Grand Theft Auto? But okay, where am I going with this? Well, this fact is actually an argument supporting our today's theory of interest, because that just gives Catalina's surprise in Grand Theft Auto more sense. Because in this case, the deal between the Mafia and the cartel at the end of Portland, which Maria mentioned, was a lie. So it makes sense that Catalina didn't find out about Claude in that moment, which would justify her surprise in Grand Theft Auto. But that's of course skipping the other argument speaking behind Catalina knowing about Claude much earlier. But since, like I said, the argument with King Courtney is actually quite bendable, because like I said, we may assume a correct canon order, and I guess that it's maybe possible somehow that Catalina didn't hear about that new assassin in town mashing up every gang including them until Grand Theft Auto. I guess that is a possibility. But the argument that today's theory rules out, so the deal mentioned by Maria, was probably the strongest. And well, if this theory is correct, it now makes sense why Catalina was surprised about seeing Claude in Grand Theft Auto. So that's where I was getting at with all this. So now we can move on to another thing speaking behind that theory being correct. See, at the end of the game, Claude fired a shot from a shotgun and Maria suddenly stopped speaking, which of course either means he shot her or that he fired it in the air and she just shut up because she got scared. But if we went with this first version, so that Claude killed Maria, it's kind of possible but also very random and harsh. Like, he could have done it in like 10,000 different moments, and you know, the fact that he did it only then is sort of like just illogical, I guess. But if we assume that today's theory is correct, and if we assume that Claude actually seen through Asuka and Maria and was aware, or became at some point aware, that Sal hadn't actually betrayed him and it had been only played out like this by his two female companions, that would have given him a reason to actually cap that Maria. But it gets even better with Asuka, because with Maria, we can easily say that he killed her because she was annoying and that it was her fault that Sally set him up because she told him that they were an item. So he was angry at her and considered her worthless, so he didn't have an issue with pulling a trigger at her. But with Asuka, Claude betrayed her by killing Kenji disguised as a Colombian, as well as by working for the Yardis, who were Kenji's rivals. Why did he do that? Asuka was after all really good to him. I mean, she gave him a job, a place to stay, was overall very nice to him, appreciated his work and skills, and treated him really well. Claude had no ground to betray her. But not if we assume that Claude was aware of the fact that Asuka got Maria to lie to him about the betrayal of Sal, especially if he would have been aware that she'd have done it for her personal benefit. In that case, if she lied to me, I can lie to her. And that would also be why he didn't care about her death in the ransom cutscene. Therefore, this theory of today also adds another layer of argumentation for why Claude decided to betray Asuka, specifically by killing her brother. Another doubtful story of Maria is that Asuka and her were old friends, and now, suddenly, she popped up out of nowhere ready to voluntarily help her and Claude. And as the first argument supporting this theory that it was a lie, I'm going to just play the dialogue for you.
This is a friend of mine, okay? She's an old friend, it's so good. She's someone we can trust.
A couple things to point out, apart from the fact that Maria was very stressed while saying it, but that's okay. The whole escape is a stressful situation. I get it. But first, Maria uses something I'll call an assurance tag in her statement, so that okay at the end. That part is completely futile in the statement, and all it indicates is the auto uncertainty over the spoken statement. Now of course in this case, Maria may have been concerned of how Claude will react to Asuka, whether he'll trust her, etc. But it also just as well may indicate the uncertainty of the validity of the statement, she's a friend of mine, meaning that it may have not been true. Our bodies are generally scared of lying, because in the case someone we lie to realizes that we're lying to them, we don't achieve what we want and the person gets angry at us and loses trust in us, which in the case where we value the person we lied to is a problem, and it was definitely that case with Maria. Hell, I'd even say that Claude was the most important person in her life at that point. So that assurance tag for me may well be an indicator of Maria simply lying about Asuka being her friend. Another thing, she repeated her statement and corrected it by adding old, that Asuka is an old friend of hers in fact. This also indicates falsehood, See, lying is a lot harder than telling the truth. When we tell the truth, we just report what we see. We don't need to account or think through every factor for everything to make sense because the rules of this universe already do this job for us. Simply, if we tell the truth, it has to make sense because it's the truth. That's what's actually happening, and it couldn't have been happening if it was not true. See what I'm saying? Now, if you lie, the thing you say isn't happening. Therefore, it is on you to make sure that every bit of the story makes sense, which is very difficult, and often we realize we missed something when it's too late and we may attempt to correct it immediately. So Maria, while saying that lie to Claude, may have realized half sentence that it's a safer story actually to add that Asuka was an old friend, not just a friend that she was in contact with even now, which would expose her two-facedness, because that would mean she was friends with the Yakuza leader while at the same time being the Mafio's Don's wife. The brain might have registered a reputation threat, so she changed the story half sentence to she's an old friend. Another thing which makes lying tricky is that you don't only have to make your story believable, but also you have to remember all of its aspects off by heart in order to be able to always respond without a thought to not expose yourself. That could have also happened here. The story they may have agreed on with Asuka is that them both is old friends. Maria, while talking to Claude, may have forgotten that part at first and she reminded herself mid-sentence and corrected herself. If that was the truth, the old friend would have come out naturally and she wouldn't have been able to forget to mention it. Another dialogue that makes me doubt that them two was old friends is this one.
Salvatore Leone will be leaving Luigi's in about 3 hours' time. Make sure he doesn't reach his club alive. Meanwhile, Maria and I will catch up on old times.
Asuka went on a monologue introducing Claude to his task of killing Salvatore, and at the end, out of nowhere, she added, "Well, me and Maria will catch up on old times." That was a completely unnecessary bit of information and wasn't really fitting the rest of the statement. Therefore, for me, she added it intentionally, not naturally. She added it in order to make the story about old friends believable, suggesting that she and Maria shared some memories from way back. Perhaps in order to repair that dodgy statement of Maria from before which we analyzed. What I mean is that naturally, I don't think she would have mentioned what her and Maria were going to do next to telling Claude to kill a Mafia Don. But moving on to more concrete reasoning, Maria and Asuka were very different people and I doubt they had many mutual interests. After all, Maria was an empty gold digger who liked spending money for the sake of it, taking drugs, playing romance with random people and pole dancing at parties, while Asuka was a bloody gang leaderess. That mix doesn't add up for me. Still, even if we say that opposites attract, how would Maria have even met Asuka without a mutual benefit? She had lived in San Andreas until 1992, and while she was at Liberty, she was basically trapped in the house with Sal. Although, yeah, we know it weren't really that from GTA LCS, but still, the scenario of Maria becoming friends with a Japanese gang leader is kind of doubtful. Going back to some dialogues, this one really highly contributes to my conviction of this theory.
Asuka and I are gonna have to talk. Why don't you go cruise around?
You'll need a place to lie low.
In there? Suspicious, not true? Yeah, it's weird because what was it they wanted to talk about so urgently that Claude was not welcome to hear? Because Claude was just as much a part of this whole offery that went on as them two were. It kinda tells me that they just wanted to talk about whether their secret deception went well and where to go from here. I can't really put it into words, it's just a feeling, you know? For me simply, this dialogue sounds dodgy as hell. And now, another dialogue that Leon deemed as an argument against this theory is that Maria told Claude that she'd told to Sal that her and him were an item. And Leon said that this was reckless and it only risked Claude getting angry at Maria. Implying, I think, that had it been a through-thought deception, such stupid statements would have been prevented. So, in simpler words, it was too dumb to think that it was pre-planned. However, I think that it was a risk that had to be taken, because coming out to Claude and saying that Sally want you dead because he wants peace with the cartel so he's decided to give you up may have not been a good enough story enough. After all, Claude was aware of how many good things he'd done for the Mafia and the overall vibe with them was so that Claude couldn't have really expected to be betrayed. That's why Maria and Asuka had to think of something that would have made Sal's betrayal believable. And so they came up with an idea that Maria finna tell Salvatore that she and Claude was having an affair, which Claude could have well believed in, that it made Sally pretty upset. Going further, like I said, the relation and the vibe between the Mafia and Claude was really friendly, to a point where it's hard to believe that he got set up in the end. I mean, here again, that's just based on my feeling, but you know, the way Tony was talking to Claude, the way Luigi and Joey even greeted Claude and Salvatore called a meeting with that "how you doing, kid?" And also the way Sal himself was talking to Claude seemed really genuine, innit? So nobody from the Mafia ever gave any signs of an intention to betray Claude. And of course, they may all have been great actors, or Sal simply never planned to betray Claude. Better yet, in the design document, in the earlier story sketches, Claude was never actually supposed to be betrayed by Salvatore. He was meant in fact to betray him by protecting Maria after she would have had run off from Sal. Also, even though we got the CG analogy, and in my video on whether Sal was a good leader, I actually managed to reason the decision to kill Claude very well, at first glance, it does look weird giving up the best hitman in town just for a temporary peace. So yeah, this theory makes sense from this aspect as well. And I left the wildest thing for the end. I mean, I don't know if I don't understand something or I misinterpret something here, but take a look at this dialogue of Asuka in an early sketch of the script from the design document. Let's get out of here before Salvatore realizes that he lost both of you. Wait a minute, Claude was told that Salvatore betrayed him willingly, so how could he be yet to realize that he finna lose him? That's either a horrible blunder that Asuka was initially supposed to make, which gives away the whole deception because she made a joke which implies Salvatore didn't know at that point that he finna lose Claude, which perfectly aligns with Chris' theory, or I don't understand something or I interpret it wrongly. Let man know. And as you can see, there's bare things supporting this theory and some other threads that make a lot more sense if we assume this theory is correct. But let's look closer at the whole plan. I mean, how exactly was everything supposed to run from behind the scenes? So first, we should establish on how Maria and Asuka came in contact. And well, like I said, I do not believe that they actually were old friends. It feels like a fairy tale to make Claude trust her. And as I also said, it was hard for me to imagine Asuka and Maria meeting at Liberty, as they were both very different people and were surely hanging out in very different places. So this already is a bit of a mystery for me. Maybe you can help me in the comments. But let's assume that I am wrong and that they did meet somewhere. They had a chat. Maria told Asuka about her tragic situation, that she's trapped in a toxic relationship and that she wanted out because she also met this new dude whom she really liked, but who was currently working for her husband and who also was a very skilled gangbanger. Asuka, since she was a Yakuza leader, saw an opportunity for herself in this. So she came up with a plan to turn Claude against Salvatore and then recruit him, which will also allow Maria to get away from her husband and still continue her efforts to get closer to Claude. And for Asuka, she will earn herself a very good hitman who will kill Salvatore for as his personal revenge. Now, how was that plan carried out though? And here's when things get a bit tricky. Cause if we assume that Sal never wanted to betray Claude, the cheetah which he told him to pick up was genuinely filled with brains and wasn't meant to be a trap. However, as you probably know, if we decide to enter the cheetah in the mission, it does explode, killing Claude in the process. That is a huge problem for this theory. Because what's the explanation here? Did Asuka and Maria plan the bomb to the car? What for? Maria wouldn't have taken a risk of Claude potentially not believing her and still going to pick up the car and getting blown up. And their plan assumed Claude not going to collect the car anyway. So what was the point in planting it with a bomb? What, in case Claude didn't trust her, wanted to check the car anyhow? The bomb was to go off on ignition, so he couldn't have really verified it in any secure way without blowing his ass up. I mean, of course, gameplay wise, we can get in and quickly get out and we'll survive. But that's not something Claude could have realistically thought of. That's just a goofy gameplay oversight. That doesn't make any sense. Therefore, it simply had to be that Salvatore did want to betray Claude. But does that rule out our theory? No, it doesn't, because as much as the cartel story was most likely bovine feces, perhaps Maria did indeed tell Sal that her and Claude were having an affair, hoping that it does piss him off and makes him want to kill Claude. And looking at the early sketch of this thread in the design document, it would've. Just take a look at the dialogues you see on the screen now after Sal had found out that Maria had made a run for it. Imagine what it would have been if he'd found out that his best hitman was going behind his back with his wife. So that was definitely a good way to piss him off and turn him against Claude. However, it was mad risky from Maria's perspective. Cause what if Sal decided to kill Claude straight away after he'd come to his club? The whole story with the car and the crusher was an extra, and it wouldn't have been a certainty. Maria couldn't have taken such a risk, could she? And even if, how did Maria find out about the car? Maybe we could say that she overheard Sal planning to do it, but then why didn't she contact Claude earlier? Only right before he reached the car. In fact, that applies to either our theory and the default interpretation of these events. Why did Maria react so late? Did she only find out about the bomb after Claude's been sent to collect the cheetah? And how did it look? Did Sal call her out of envy, saying, "Haha, you dumb broad, now your new boyfriend is going to pick up a car for me that'll explode on ignition"? If he done that, he's officially the dumbest character in the series. The only vision that I see is that Maria was lurking somewhere at Sal's yard, overheard him sending Claude to the car, and knowing that he was pissed off at him after she told him that there was an item, she was surprised that he still let Claude work for him. So she asked him about it, and Sal perhaps gave himself away, and so she read his intentions and simply ran, quickly paged Claude, and went to meet Asuka at the Molo. Actually, it ain't that bad, innit? But yeah, it kinda holds up, don't it? I'd love to see that cinematic in game, for real. So I guess that we must assume that Maria told Sal about her alleged affair with Claude, and then she made sure that she monitors the situation so Claude don't get killed at any point and that she'll be able to react on time. And Asuka's role was just that she was someone who could provide safe houses, security and source of income for the two of them in exchange of course for Claude's services, and after that it doesn't need explaining. The con that Leon also noticed is that in their opinion, Maria didn't have the composure to pull off such a deception. She would have lost her nerve and given herself away. But well, as we said, she did kind of give herself away with them subtle language nuances, no? So that is kind of true. And who knows, as we discussed, Claude may have scanned right through her and Asuka and just went with it because he didn't mind. And that would explain why he betrayed Asuka later. So yeah, it all kind of makes sense. It's not confirmed, but it actually arguably does make more sense than the default interpretation of those events. And personally, I can't really say that I assume it correct or incorrect. It's just unclear for me, uncertain. Both scenarios are possible, but neither fully confirmed. Let me know what you think in the comments. And of course, big thanks to Christine, because if not for them, this video and that idea would have never come to my mind. Also, big up to Leon Ryu for providing his opinion and a few valid points on the matter as well. Thank you lot for watching, take care and respect.